Today's episode is brought to you by the Playoff Metagame.
It's high noon.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to High Noon Podcast, the competitive Overwatch podcast. I am your host, Double Evans. With me, as always, is Deathblow. What's up, buddy?
Not too much, my man. How are you?
I'm doing great, and I'm doing even super better greater, Death, because we have an awesome guest today, don't we?
Yeah, it's hard to believe you're a semi-professional talker, but we do have a very, very special guest with us today. We all know that the playoffs are starting this week, and with it is a brand new patch and a brand new meta game. So we needed to call in some big guns. So what I did was I reached out to our good friend Freedo from YourOverwatch, asked him if he knew of any roguishly good-looking men from the Blizzard launcher that would be able to help us break down the patch. Unfortunately, I wasn't very specific. He didn't realize I meant Nateson, so we do have Freedo himself with us today. Thank you so much for joining us, Freedo. Really, really appreciate it. And big congratulations on that shout out in the launcher. I like to joke, but it was really, it put a big smile on my face when I opened up the game and had you smiling at me before I got to play.
Nice. It's a little surreal. It's a little annoying seeing yourself actually in the launcher.
I can't imagine if it was me, I would have hated it. But because it was you,
Oh, man. Are you kidding me? I would be spamming that nonstop. Like, people would be seeing it more on my Twitter feed than in the launcher. Like, there's how many millions of players? I would tweet it out more times than that, and also tag every single Overwatch player just to make
set
sure.
up a bot. Anytime anybody says Overwatch in a tweet, you just respond, "Hi, I'm Blevin."
Yeah. I'll contact the guy that runs the what is it? What is the bot that like responds to every one of Tim's tweets? Take
it to the house. Kid,
take it to the house, kid. Yeah, that literally every single tweet he does, there's the "take it to the house, kid" meme every single time. But in all seriousness, Freedo, it's good seeing you, bud. It's good talking to you. I know by this time we probably would have seen each other at some event or done something. So COVID really taking the toll here, but we get the chance to talk about.
We should be planning the joint meetup, is what we should be doing this week.
I'm not. Yeah, exactly. That's what. Yeah, exactly. That's what we should be doing, is planning that for our grand finals. But unfortunately, we don't get to do that. But yeah, so good to have you on the show, and we've got a packed one here. Of course, we've got all sorts of playoff stuff. I think this is the right button.
Yeah, playoffs? Don't talk about it. Playoffs?
We got plenty of playoffs to talk about today, but we also have a new Overwatch patch to talk about, and the metagame that is going to ensue from that. So we will certainly, we brought in the expert here for you listeners, viewers, and chat. So going to be great. But before we get into that, let's talk a little bit about what we've been up to lately. Freedo, anything fun and exciting lately besides being featured in the Overwatch in the Blizzard launcher? Anything exciting for you?
No, just working hard, making Overwatch and Valorant content, switching between the games. One cool thing about covering Valorant, though, is I feel it sort of refreshed my love of the game of Overwatch, because it's nothing like a slower game that is more punishing in one direction to help you enjoy being a Winston main. It's like not having to aim. Well, that feels great going back to that. So, yeah, it's been exciting covering both scenes and a lot of things going on.
Well, if only we could get you to do a video based around why my aim sucks in Overwatch, but is pretty, at least comparatively good in Valorant, because that makes no sense to me. One of them's all about aim, and I've got it there. The other one, I can make do without it, but I don't have it there. It drives me nuts. But that's not the topic for today.
It is very bizarre that is the case, because I've played with you in both, and that is certainly what happens.
It's very different types of aim, though. Valorant's like 90% crosshair placement, where that doesn't really matter in Overwatch. You just need to be flicking all over the place. So, in some ways, Overwatch takes more aim on certain characters anyway.
that explains the dominance of particular Overwatch transfers to that game, I suppose. But what about you, Blevins? What have you been up to the last 2 weeks? Because we were off last week.
Oh, that's right. We were off last week. That's why people are tweeting at us being like, holy crap, High Noon still exists. And I go, I was just as surprised as you were. Yeah, doing the LOR thing. So I've been doing the opposite of playing shooter games, playing card games like a boomer, and not even really playing as much as casting, which has been fun. But nothing exciting there. Well, I mean, it's exciting for me, but nothing exciting for our dear Overwatch listeners. But yeah, same old there. But before we
Is your aim bad in card games like it is shooters? Or no?
No, my aim is flawless, and I'm trying to think if there's anything even analogous to aim. I guess ordering your attackers is kind of like aim, except not.
You get high APM and you need to like really finish your turn or what. I'm thinking like in Hearthstone terms, if you're roping, you gotta click the right things, you gotta queue up all your actions.
Oh, there's not really any of that in there could be, but it doesn't. The long story short, it doesn't work like that in LOR. You can do infinite combos technically, though there's not very many. But I don't know why we're going off. This is the least exciting tangent to go off on, and we have a bunch that we could. So before we move on, just want to make sure everyone knows Blackwatch Report, of course, has done their episode this week. Keeping it on. Make sure you're following Blackwatch Report if you're not already. Hashtag support tier 2. They're keeping the eternal flame of tier 2 and tier 3 and everything else lit. So make sure you're checking out Blackwatch Report on Twitter and on their feed. But let's move on here, and I just knew that was the right button. That was crazy. We've got a new meta coming through here, Death. We've got a lot of changes and a lot that will likely impact the playoffs moving forward. So why don't you take it away, Death?
Absolutely. Yeah, there's some pretty major changes to some particular heroes. There's more changes than we're going to discuss specifically today, but there's 4 heroes in particular that got some changes and some reworks here that I think are particularly impactful here. The first one is Brigitte. Her base health was lowered from 200 to 150. Her Inspire total healing decreased from 130 to 90, and the self-healing is no longer reduced by half. So maintaining a good portion of, or if not more so, reliable in the middle of Inspire, I guess just generally speaking. A little more self-healing than normal, right? Just looking at the numbers, but Freedo, I'll let you kind of speak to the specifics on that. A very specific nerf here to Brig, not a character we've seen. Again, there was an Overwatch patch today. I want to clarify. It's not the one we're talking about. We're talking about the changes that went through in the patch that the Overwatch League Playoffs will be on. So, forgive me if I get anything jumbled up. And Freedo's more of a professional than I am, but I'm going to put that disclaimer out there for him because it's a little crazy right now to be dealing with the live patch and talking about that metagame, what that's going to look like as of today, and then also looking back at what's been the live patch for a couple of weeks. So I'm just going to go through the rest of these changes here, and then we'll try to take a holistic look at what we think the metagame will be for the playoffs, what we think is going to be strong, and try to extrapolate that a little bit to see what teams might be a little stronger than we've seen in the past or might benefit from the metagame that we're going to kind of propose and talk about today. Outside of Brig, we have Orisa, base armor reduced from 250 to 200. The radius on Halt was reduced from 7 to 4 meters, and the projectile speed increased from 20 to 30. Much more of a skill shot based ability that Halt is than it was before, instead of being a graviton surge on cooldown. But Roadhog, Scrap gun to general. The ammo was reduced from 6 to 5. Damage per projectile increased from 6 to 7. It's just 1, Freedo. It'll be fine. It's fine. And recovery increased from 0.7 to 0.85. And then lastly, Sigma, experimental barrier, the shield. The HP was reduced from 900 to 700. Regeneration rate reduced from 120 to 80 per second. And the kinetic grasp cooldown increased from 10 to 12 seconds. Again, couple other changes, random Symmetra buff, a Pharah buff. There was a couple other things, but these are the meta heroes that either were or are in comp on this patch. So we're going to kind of highlight these. Freedo, what have you seen, at least in comp, on this patch that the Overwatch League is going to be playing on? Let's start with that as kind of a baseline for level 1, what the comp and the meta might look like.
Right. If you followed the game recently, we're talking about the Hog Zarya patch that lasted, what is it, 1 or 2 weeks, I believe it was, and they've already since changed it on live, so that might alter. So it's the playoffs in entirety will be that like 2-week hellacious patch for ranked. Now the question is, would something like Orisa Hog work at the professional level? That's what gets kind of tricky, because Roadhog as a character, even if he has like tons and tons of stats, he's better when you're indecisive or when you don't have discipline around your teammates. So it's tough. We've only really seen Hog played in a few scenarios in like the new version of Hog. I'm talking years now at this point. Like Hook 1.0 aside, let's put that into the time capsule to discuss on a different show perhaps at some point. But
that time capsule looks like a garbage can. That's where I'm putting Hog 1.0.
the space time hook back in the day. But like, so it's difficult to discuss. So like, even if we were to copy paste the ranked meta, like I don't even know if that works. There's that point, but then also I don't even know if Blizzard nerfed the right meta in this patch, because if you look at the Countdown Cup and then maybe even the one before it, I'm trying to extrapolate this, there was a counter meta comp getting developed called the Double Bubble, and to me anyway, I don't know if you guys agree with this, I think it was clear by the end of the Countdown Cup for sure, but maybe even before that, it seemed obvious that it was the best way to play. And essentially the reason why is because it could maximize on so many different ways, whereas the spam meta comp is pretty much around halt and ranged poke damage and bursting things. The Zarya Winston combination had the highest peak with teamwork, because you could have a front line where Winston would go in, get the bubble, farm primal, and get an Ana nade. When you land all of those abilities in cycle, work up to those ultimates, then there's Sombra in the back. So previously, Halt was like so reliable to point at a thing and kill it, right? But if your DPS is Sombra, who plays away from all of those duels and is sort of just aiding the front line, and you're working up to these ultimates, well, then all of a sudden you got EMP and an Ana anti-nade, and then you have a primal, and then you're working up to the next EMP, and you have nano boost to charge up the primal, and there was that big cycle that went through. So my question is, you brought me on to bring answers, and the best I can do is guess a lot of these things. My question is Orisa Sigma even meta on the old patch? I don't even think that's the case, because it seemed unplayable up against this new Double Bubble comp. So the question is then, would the Roadhog patch that we've experienced in ranked for the past couple weeks beat that comp on paper? And I don't even know if that's true. I could go on to another tangent, but like, Hog is essentially the same character as Orisa, like in principle. He's ranged, does damage, he has this hook, which is a CC ability. He just has more damage than Orisa and no shield. So the Double Bubble comp actually interacts with that new Hog in a similar way if you land it right. Like in ranked, it's like pick Winston against Hog, like forehead, that's the worst idea you could ever have. But for the pro level, they use the bubble on Winston, the Zarya bubble on Winston first, and then he can block out in time the other bubble to block the Hog hook. And an interesting aspect of the new Hog is that he's actually more inefficient against shields and barriers and bubbles and stuff than he was before. Not a lot of people know this, don't realize this is the case. But before, 6 shots at 150, I did the math earlier, trust me, I can pull it up again, but I believe it was 900. I believe that equates to 900 overall damage before he has to reload. Now it's actually 875, so slightly less, and there's bigger gaps in between his shots. Higher burst damage, so when he actually does hook you, he kills you more. But if he has to kind of push past the Zarya bubble and the Winston bubble used appropriately, it's not as good. So that's sort of the template for you guys. I really don't know. I'm not sure. I wonder if the Winston comps would still just be good, because it's like, it's not like you can run the nerfed version of Halt against it, because it was already failing, right? Like Orisa's just dumpstered as far as I'm concerned, because that Halt change was way overkill. They've since changed it back a little bit. He's so happy to not have to play Orisa anymore.
Yeah, no.
Right. So she's just out, right? So like a lot of characters that play around that Orisa comp also go out as far as I'm concerned. So like what does BAP do if you can't have an Orisa? Like, you know what I mean? Like is Ashe really the best DPS character, or was she the best for poke mirrors? She had the most firepower to exchange when you both were playing ranged at each other, but is she the best necessarily when there's like a lot of movement characters on the fight, or if you're getting rushed down and stuff like that? If the tempo of the engagements are faster, is Ashe better? I don't necessarily think so. So I think the meta is either exactly what we just saw or something different. Maybe the sorry, a hog, but I'd have another argument why I don't think that's the case. But so that I laid some groundwork. I don't know if you guys want to,
No, absolutely.
build on that foundation at all.
And I think we can look and not have to look too far back into history to see something very similar happen. And that was in this exact same spot last year in the Overwatch League, when it was goats, and it was the whole season, and it was all anybody could do. And then all of a sudden there was just, Houston beat San Francisco by just playing this dive, Sombra-based hack fist, whatever meta game, and Shanghai was kind of doing that too, and on the other side of things. And there was these couple of teams that seemed to have figured out, you don't have to play this. And then as soon as that gets figured out and popularized and people really wake up to that fact, then we finally got the patch everybody'd been begging for 6 to 12 months, that 222's in play, and it's just we're completely changing it. But did we need to fight it anymore, or did we see it organically, naturally get taken down? And I guess the answer is the same now as it was then. It doesn't matter, because we get this patch and it's what they're going to play on, and it's super fun and it's super interesting to kind of think of it that way. And just, I guess that's really just the nature of the development cycle, right? Like, they put these changes into testing internally, they're working on them, they like the way the game is and it feels on that, so they decide to go with it, and then things kind of like, that's what in the hopper for 2 weeks maybe, or something like that, and then the pro meta moves on its own independent of that, and it just kind of happens anyways. So it's definitely really interesting, and I think that really is the heart of what we're trying to figure out here. Is we'd seen a bit of a transition away from that double shield, and now these patch notes really could just completely strip it away from teams as an option. Whereas before, maybe it wasn't optimal, but it was, at least it had, the power level of those abilities before, and teams might have been comfortable with it and might have opted for it. And now it really doesn't feel like that's going to be much of the choice. Now, when we look here too, just another bit of a teaser, Nero today tweeted, y'all are not ready for APAC playoff meta. So that tells us, to me at least, don't expect the Giga Hog, like just, Hog Zarya running all over the place, right? We're all ready for that. We're all talking about it. We're all thinking it's what's going to happen, because it's what's been dominating our ranked gameplay for 2 weeks now. So I think it's pretty safe to say we're going to be seeing something else. And in line with that, I think we can comfortably say we've heard some early reports, and this is mostly coming from like tier 2 and tier 3 teams, and not from the Overwatch League teams themselves, so maybe there's more to it than what we see, but I'm really seeing a lot of talk about Winston and D.Va together in a traditional dive style meta. You're still going to have a good amount of your Widowmakers, your Ashes, your just kind of hit scan DPS seem to be just really, really powerful. That's why they were addressed in the power creep patch that hit today onto live servers. But I guess that's really the question. It seems like we're a little bit in agreement here, Freedo, that it's probably going to lean towards something a little bit more dive oriented, at least in the tank line. Am I understanding you correctly there?
Possibly. And I think a good point to realize why that's the case, or the other option I want to keep in my mind, APAC might run a little Roadhog Wrecking Ball, because they already liked playing that way anyway, especially some of the teams where that's a full deathmatch comp. I can see that happening, before the Zarya Hog meta, because what Zarya Hog was really good in ranked is that it fit in how players like to play ranked team fights normally, right? I've made millions of videos about this, but the way pros take engagements is fundamentally different than even the highest tiers of ranked, because in Overwatch ranked, you sort of just want to walk to a generally useful spot and fight there. Whereas our pros, we saw this especially in the GOATS era, right? They would hide in a little room until the objective unlocks, then go out and all do a thing together properly, right? Like their shot calling of how they engage is just totally different than what you normally see. So in that world where people are like fighting at unopportune times and maybe feeding a little bit, like you had to play Zarya to catch someone getting hooked with their hog flanking. But if everybody's ready for the flank and you have Ana ready to punish it, that's not as good. Or if you run that Zarya, what happens anytime you see this is I guess a easy template you can apply to any time Zarya gets ran in the Overwatch League, even when she's pretty good now, is that she's the focus fire target, which in ranked typically feels like a bad idea because there isn't enough coordination. But there's lots of ways for you to do too much damage to the Zarya, then can be healed, then she can bubble and everything. Whether it's like just a slight little positioning change where they boop her forward or isolate her with a Winston bubble. Jake made a great video about this actually, of Smurfs Winston, of how he would dive essentially to block off the healing and bubble the things that would help Zarya, and they would focus Zarya because she's slow, right? The reason why I think Wrecking Ball Hog might work is that you kind of don't give them a good target. Like Hog looks like a good target, right? Maybe, but he's got insane damage and a hook and a breather, and so he's more tanky than Zarya, I think, in that way, because he's kind of a bigger threat, and Ball just runs away from you and is playing off in the distance, and he's setting up the attacks. So
yeah, adaptive shield for 9 million HP, grapple out of dodge. Yeah.
Right. There's about 1 million Overwatch League comps that I think would destroy Zarya Hog. Like you could the classic Philadelphia Fusion May Brawl, right? Like, yeah, shields are weak, but if you all play together and you have a great wall every time, I mean, do you really get great May walls in ranked? Not really, right? Like you don't have the planning of knowing, are the walls going to be here every time perfectly, and we can structure around it and you won't get rolled. Whereas Ivy playing May, they dominated that. Like you try to run Zarya Hog against the Fusion, I think, and they just pick that comp and run at you, like your front line just falls apart. It doesn't matter the stats they have; they just die. So anyway, that's my rant on that.
Yeah, May was so dominant early in the season, and in large part because it really shut down that halt hook play style. It was so disruptive to that, especially at the Overwatch League level, with the level of synergy, with the level of pre-planning. You know, in you mentioned in comp it works, and that's, you know, it doesn't work. You can't just shut it down with the May like that. But these teams are from, you know, it's so completely different from the moment the doors open between your comp games and Overwatch League. Everybody has a plan. Nobody's off on their own. Nobody just absentmindedly
There's no rogue agents.
This room, right? You know,
Right.
gets themselves in this stupid spot. So when you know my whole team's here, you know, if one of my teammates are getting hooked, it's happening from in this cluster I'm in. Bam, wall it. Just stop it.
Right.
So I think that's great. It's something my play group tried to do in comp and shut down the Zarya and the Roadhog compositions. It didn't quite work out for us because, you know, we're bad in comparison and we don't have the levels of synergy. But it's basically, since the moment this patch hit, I was pretty determined in my stance that Hog is I go way over the top when I talk about Hog because I don't really like him as a hero that much, but just like a synergyless ball of garbage. And just right now, that synergyless ball of garbage outputs a lot of damage, and it's oppressive in the comp scene. But listen, when you're talking about off tanks like Choi Hyo Bin and Han Bin and, you know, Krong and those guys, being able to use a character like Diva to shut down the damage output of a character like Roadhog, it's vastly different than what it is if it's me and Blevins hopping in as a tank duo into comp. Like you're just able to get so much more out of every interaction, every ability, everything, that you can really overcome something as simple as just what might be a slightly overtuned damage number. But it was just one. It was just one, Freedo. Don't worry, it won't be. I always laugh when I see the patch notes for Overwatch. It's like, oh, that's such a small change, and it's like, no, interactions, breakpoints, you're instantly dead. You don't, you don't get it. I'll never get it. But yeah, so it's just really going to be a lot of fun to me to see exactly how they do break this down. But my question for you now, Freedo, is assuming we're kind of right about that, right? And that teams are lining up Winston Diva versus Winston Diva, right? Like, let's assume that's correct. What do you think the DPS players and selections are going to be? Obviously, it's not going to be down to 2, but are there maybe 3 or 4 that you think are going to be at the forefront for these teams, assuming we're in something divey?
Yeah, it's tough to pick heroes because I don't necessarily like. So Brig to me is the core to all this, and sort of the Pandora's box, I suppose, to to really dive into the meta, because in ranked up against Hog, the breakpoints really matter to me, and that less health really makes a difference. I'm not so sure if the pros will feel the same way or not. And she was, funnily enough, like so crucial to dive mirrors because of how she could be a replacement tank when she needed to be. She had the reliable ranged healing, and just all of her fighting abilities really worked against the setups and interacted well with it. The numbers to me against other things make her weak. I think like in ranked, she feels useless on the Zarya Hog patch from the past couple weeks. But in a dive mirror, she may still be the best. And so because of that, it like changes what's good and if she is good or not. I think a safe bet would be like Sombra Tracer. Like if you were prepping for this patch, playing those characters, I think they do much better in Owl than they do in ranked, especially Sombra, right? But part of the reason why is you can get such a reliable output from them, where as long as your player plays like mechanically sound in the positions they're supposed to play, you know what you're going to get. And it's hard to like counter them, basically. Like they just exist, they get a very reliable amount of value, but they potentially carry if like, Striker pops off or whatever, right? But they don't feel risky, basically. They're not a very greedy pick. And so because of that, they work really well with teamwork, even up against Brig, oddly enough, who you would think wouldn't. But like when she has ultimate, then they kind of get shut down. But the truth is, other characters that have a much more committing style, let's say Genji, for example, unless his numbers are overtuned like they were, he gets bashed by Brig when he goes in, right? And she has interactions against them. She has interactions against Genji, whereas the Sombra Tracer can play at arm's reach. So I would suspect something like that, because also on top of that, we already have seen the Zarya Winston comps with Sombra play like that in the Countdown Cup. I'm not so sure Diva would be play. I'm not exactly sure why they would go with Zarya instead of Diva. Maybe because the dive mirror is better with Diva. And that might be the reason why. And she has, she can like spot check for Sombra, interacts with the Tracer Sombra a bit better, being like at targets hacked, you can matrix them. Tracer's farming you can more reactively silence some of her damage, whereas Zarya can't do all of those things. So if it is indeed Diva, like I'd be surprised at that, but I would assume it's because the layers of meta have sort of cascaded, right? Where I think Hog Zarya would beat on paper the Winston Diva tank line, but the Zarya enabled Winston would beat that. So, yes. And because you're not running that, then you go down to the next, like meta always is, it's not like the strongest peak thing. It's the thing that's left after everything gets countered or counterpicked and is assumed not to be reliable enough.
I'm 3 levels deep in the pocket game in Smash Brothers against you.
We just know metas are like onions. There's many layers, and it's not the whole onion that matters. It's what's left of the onion after you peel back the layers.
Yeah, but that's I'm really glad you mentioned that, because it is something I completely skipped over in my conversation about it. Yeah, I think the Winston Diva composition probably does get beat by the Zarya and the Roadhog, but I think that there exists the counter for the Zarya Roadhog that just makes it so that way that's kind of out of the running, right? Like if you switch to that, then there's just whether it's Winston Zarya, which is probably it, or like Ball Zarya or something along those lines that just doesn't allow that Roadhog Zarya duo to really exist. It really maybe outside of like a last second swap on a point going into the last fight, right? Like you don't have time. You're pushing the cart. You're on it. We know what you're playing. If it's Winston Diva, I just get to come out on Roadhog Zarya and take this fight, sort of a thing. So yeah, I think there could be a decent amount of movement to it. That kind of brings me to my other question. I've been a big, I don't know if it's proponent or just like I've been very unclear and unsure of why it's been Winston lately over the Wrecking Ball. It's a little bit based on my bias.
I was gonna say I can give you one reason why you're wondering this.
Winston's, it's not even really biased, right? It's Winston's my favorite tank hero in the game. Like if I had to pick one main tank hero to play, it would be Winston. I'm dying for that comp meta to come back. I can't wait, right? I want it back. But I did force myself to learn ball recently. So I think when I currently log in and play and pick my hero, if I pick Winston, it's going to go worse than if I picked Wrecking Ball, because I just spent a bad Wrecking Ball meta forcing myself to learn it and find out ways to be successful with it, even though it was a bad pick or whatever it was. Like I just kind of got myself. So outside of like my personal performance and my personal results on the two different heroes, I'm curious why we're not seeing more teams opt into the Wrecking Ball, because to me it's so much more disruptive. It's so much harder to counter, in the sense that like you've really got to find them. Is it just, I mean, I know I'm bad against Sombra on Wrecking Ball. Is that just it? Are the Owl players not able to like beat out the Owl Sombras, or why haven't we seen more of a transition into Wrecking Ball, a hero that I've low-key thought would be the meta main tank option in this patch?
Yeah, it gets a little confusing because of the hero pool play. I think sometimes skews opinions on this. There was that one hero pool where Wrecking Ball looked unstoppable for a bit, and especially if Brig feels unplayable for whatever reason, then maybe you would say, because her ability is just totally throw him off if she lands them, so that it's too much of a reliable hard counter. So if she's out, when she was out of the mix in the hero pools, then he looked really strong. Wrecking Ball seemed more popular in APAC from what I saw. I didn't watch all of their games. I've watched more from NA. And NA, it felt like certain teams tried him, like the Gladiators, for example, I think tossed OG out there a few times. Or Tank's OG, right? I'm just remembering that.
Yep.
On Wrecking Ball. And the problem is the engagement style you have to take with Ball is so obvious to Owl pros. In ranked, I think sometimes as well you can get there's a bias, confirmation bias, I suppose is what it is, of when it works hard, right?
Yeah.
And you're like, boom, I did a thing and I killed a thing, I booped this guy and they're all mined and they're all dead, right? But you kind of forget the times where it's like, I tried to engage, but they booped me away, so I have to run away and now my team's screwed. Okay, so
you're right. I have no memory of those times.
Right, it's almost like they never happened.
But I remember flexing in real life after the good games when you're on ball and you win. I'm like, oh, I'm so good at this game.
That's exactly confirmation bias.
He's kind of a win more hero, basically, or like, he doubles down. You land your play, it works harder, and it'll which is why like Chengdu is so fun to watch sometimes, right? Where it's like they're flailing, boom, like the pile driver and the rocket comes in, everything perfect, and they wipe up the whole fight. Like, so it's a very boom or bust playstyle just inherently. So if you're ready for it and you position right, and like anytime the ball tries to engage and fails, you would have been like, well, we could have had a reliable engage with Winston and get the same thing every single time. And I think that's important with this meta, or just like Overwatch League level play, and it might just be a feature moving forward because of like, do you really want to risk an entire map based on whether ball gets booped one direction or not, right? Like Winston's a much more reliable, we're going to send him to this spot every time, isolate this thing, and it won't be as high of a peak, but it's much more reliable. So I think that's why Winston also, to explain that consistency, he can always get on the team and cleave, right? Whereas Ball, there's some positions he can't play. Winston actually is more flexible with the positions he plays as well. It's not just more reliable, but he's more flexible even. Where you kind of want to face tank, and if you play in a certain spot where you're dodging a good ball engage, well, Ball just can't engage there. Whereas Winston, he can play a corner, he can play in the open, he can play more spots basically. So yeah, that's my argument for Winston.
That makes a lot of sense, and it explains why the majority of Overwatch League teams run Winston over Ball, but it actually, I think, also would lead me to believe that more teams should be running something like Ball, even if it's less consistent, if it has that like spike ability of like, hey, we can do something crazy here. If you're a worse team,
Right.
I mean, Death, we've been talking about this for years, like the Hail Mary, like, hey, I'm not going to beat insert best team or insert team that's better than me. Let's just run Ball, and like we were going to lose anyway. What it doesn't matter. Like, we're not going to get 2 losses for this loss, right? Now, if you're playing in the tournament format, you might get 2 wins for a win, but you're not getting 2 losses for a loss, right? If you're going to lose anyway, just go for it. But I also understand, and we've seen a lot of teams, and this is a completely different tangent that we don't need to go on, just be like more risk averse.
Yeah.
To like, oh, well, it's the standard thing. And I mean, for what it's worth, we'll probably grill teams if they're doing dumb things, right? Like, it's,
you can't win. You can't win unless
right.
you win.
Unless you win. Yeah. You don't win unless you win. Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's, I mean, there's nothing more true in life than that. You don't win unless you win.
Yeah. The thing, especially the thing I said about focusing Zarya, right? That's
Right.
a lot easier if it's Zarya Ball, which is why I think it's more likely that they don't run the Zarya. But then it feels weird because your main tank needs the Zarya to not get rolled. So yeah, it's tough.
Yeah, and there's also just not like an infinite amount of time in terms of like practice time to like be wacky and try all this weird stuff. So I doubt that we'll see too much crazy stuff, even though I think like the lower seed teams like go out with a bang, right? Granted, if it's not good, it doesn't matter, but I don't know, just something to think about for sure. But
the problem is, I think these non-standard meta comps take a long time to develop.
Right.
Like Deathblow, I thought did a great job bringing in the anti-goats comps, right? Like the Dragons were running that for a long time, and then it finally paid off. So it's like finally we've cracked the code, and I think in some ways the double bubble comp to beat the spam meta is the same way, where there's this comp sitting over on the side. It's like we got to get all the synergies right. Like it's a comp where individually it doesn't work, but when you get the bubble and the Ononade to farm up Primal and you got EMP, then all of a sudden it's like, oh, it's obvious. It's just their buttons are better. Like you got to pick it. That's the way it looked to me by the end of it, right? But before that, you don't execute. Well, then Halt kills you every time, and you're like, well, why would I run anything but Halt? So
and it's very, I mean, everything is a zero-sum game, right? Like if you're practicing this speculative comp, you're not practicing like something else, right? So
if you take that chance, try to figure it out, try to make it work, and you're wrong, then you're so far behind the 8 ball on what is the level 1 meta or whatever. So it really is a big gamble.
Risk it for playoffs, though, I say, because it's over. It's season's over. You got one game and you're done.
If leave it all out on the stage.
But to Blevins' point, what other chance does any of the teams that play on Friday have? I mean, there's just it feels really difficult, and specifically maybe a team like Houston, who doesn't seem to want to go back to Muma, who's their best Winston player, and has Hydration at the main tank, who is probably the worst Winston player in Overwatch League. I mean, from what I've seen, I don't want it to be true. I'm wearing the jersey, I believe, but I don't at the same time. I watched the man jump on Volskaya into the middle of the mega room. I think everybody knows what I'm talking about since we're all Overwatch fans. Just stand there. He just stood there and died, and he did it like 3 fights in a row. And it's so when that's kind of like what you're dealing with, because the guy was a Genji and Pharaoh one trick for 4 years, and then all of a sudden you've got him on main tank, right? Like it's really hard to, hey, you've got to dive here, you've got to take the space, you've got to section off the healers, but like, how does he make all that work, and how does he do everything perfectly? And the punishes when you are in a bad spot in Overwatch, like they're instant. Like you don't have time to go, oh, I need to back up now. It's I need to respawn now.
You'll be backing up very quickly.
In the wrong spot.
Dude, Houston is so cursed, man. It's like they always get the right player like a season too late, or they got Dante a year after they needed the Tracer. They had Muma, but dive was trash, so they developed hydration. Now Winston's meta again. So what do they do? Incorporate him back in? It's that man. It's tough. I hope they do, actually. I think that would be the play.
That is to admit when you've made a wrong decision or need to reverse course and actually do it and realize that it's being reactive, it's being adaptive, it's being smart. It's not damning somebody or saying hydration wasn't good enough. It's saying our best chance to win is with this play. I'd love to see that from them, just that this gives us our best chance to win mentality, so this is what we're going to do. And in fairness, we get that from them at times. They were one of the teams that was embracing the Shanghai, hack dive style and triple DPS last year. They've shown it, but they don't consistently and regularly go to that on time, right? It's almost like, oh, it's stage 4 now, we're not making the playoffs, so all bets are off, let's try it. Oh, look, it's working. Oops, maybe we should have done it 2 months ago. Or it just, thankfully everybody's in the postseason this time around, so we got here, and all that is make the right decision this time. And if it is dive, man, hopefully that's the case. But all right, so the one part of the DPS conversation, I expected to hear a lot about how powerful the snipers are, and I didn't hear that. So can you talk to me about the position of maybe Widowmaker and Hanzo in this playoff meta that we're going to face, and what it would take to get them involved? Because I've heard a lot about them, and honestly, I thought we'd just see a ton of Widowmakers in the playoffs. Is that something you foresee, or maybe a little less than I was personally hoping for?
Well, map specific, you always can run a Widow at the pro level, but again, and sorry if I'm copy pasting too much here, but I feel the Countdown Cup informs this meta more than the patch does in a way. So it's like, well, what's the reason why we didn't see as much Widow then? We saw a bit, right? But it seemed like Carpe didn't play, right? They're playing their Sombra player, not their hitscan player. There's a reason for that. And that's because they think they have a read on the meta. And I think the reason for that is the mirror playstyle of that comp doesn't play in sightlines, basically. Like, if you have the type of comp that can choose to avoid sightlines, well, then Widow's standing around with holding the bag, and without things to fight. If there's a way for you to create those sightlines, perhaps, but if you play these faster characters, what are you diving, right? Like Winston and Diva, like if what you say is turns out to be true, like Zarya is exploitable. Okay, you can boop her forward and whatnot, get a headshot, fine. But Winston, Diva, Tracer, Sombra, it's like, who are we diving at this point? At the OWL level, the supports hide a lot of the time, so they're not out in the open getting sniped. So and if you're trying to set up that line of sight, you've already gotten flanked and gotten killed, right? So I think that's the reason why. It's interesting the way that there's like a rule about the game. Let's say like shields are weak, so Widow is strong. That's true, but you don't have to play in those sight lines. So you could break that rule by playing other characters that like create a different rule, which is I'm always behind you or whatever. And that's the interesting thing about Sombra to me, is that her infinite invisibility buff, I feel, is really starting to get maximized by these OWL pros, where they're really stretching the limit of like, I can be in the perfect spot every single time. And I feel maybe previously that wasn't as obvious, maybe because there wasn't the right comp for it or whatever. But with that, like if they land a hack, you just these mobile characters that were hiding in the bushes, guerrilla warfare tactics, right? That might be a good analogy, right? Where spam meta wants to fight like in formation, and the double bubble comp is guerrilla tactics. So they're coming out of bushes and stuff, jumping out, and all of a sudden, some hi there, and it hacks you. You can't get away. You can't use your abilities, and you're just dead. So it's like Widow's sick when the fight is open and she has shots to take. But even then, like Ashe was better. So anyway, I think the play style is that unless the map is great, it's tough to find a target to shoot at as Widow. So because of that, you might as well be winning the positional game as they're fighting it.
All right. So Blevin, since
My guess. Anyway, these are all guesses. I mean, we don't know, right? Maybe Ons just goes in there and doesn't miss, and it just changes everything that I've said.
It's all guesswork, and to be honest, we've seen multiple times as been mentioned. The stakes are so high with Overwatch League, and you've got coaches that really, really want to be employed next season. You've got players that are trying to stay in the league, and it really can backfire when you go out on a limb and you make a statement and you say, this isn't the week 12 hero pool that they got wrong, right? This is the we lost, we're going home hero pool of everything's available. And so with all of that, with the limited prep time, with every challenge, it really does make a lot of these teams risk averse and make them shy away from it, make them go, well, I mean, we've scrimmed against 5 teams and they all ran this composition, and it's different than what we wanted to run, and we only beat one of them, or whatever a scrim win is in their minds, right? We're only happy with the way one of these scrims went, and
so you only accrued a certain number of scrim bucks is how you
right. So like they've then got to just adapt and just become what they've been playing against in scrims all these times to avoid standing out in a negative light at a time when, as soon as you're done, players are getting cut, right? Locker rooms are getting cleared out, team houses are getting their spring cleaning done, and it's a very stress-inducing environment, and it doesn't always lead to we made the correct decision or we made the smart move and we went with what was the correct method.
I mean, just look at season 1. Like, imagine an alternate reality where Houston just ignoring the tracer ends up working for them. Like, imagine Houston in season 1 is like in that scenario is just like, yeah, we don't need tracer. We've defined the meta. It doesn't involve tracer. Like, again, in order to win, you need to win, right? And that was it. It turned out that wasn't the case, but maybe like if we look at it in a different frame of reference, maybe like they're trying to break the meta without tracer. Now, that's probably not what it was. They just didn't have anyone who was good at it. But I don't know. It's really tough, and we have the luxury of being able to sit back and be like, oh, do our bidding, play the fun thing that we want to see, do the crazy thing. But it's like, yeah, if you try something different and it doesn't work, there's a non-zero chance that you just lose your job. Like, so it's certainly an easy thing for me to say other people should do. But
you guys skipped a week. I don't know if there's too much of a departure, but I feel it plays into the points we're making. Dpay went really spicy on Twitter. Did you guys see that?
Oh, I loved it. Dpay, he shoulder checked Packing 10 so hard on Twitter.
Right. I'm gonna paraphrase what he said. So they had a knockout series against them, or like a blow for blow, where Gladiators barely showed up on top in the 5th map, if I recall correctly. And then he added Packing 10, saying, like, your team plays better when you're coaching Valorant, basically telling him, like, I'm the man, like, stay out of Overwatch.
I'll just read it. I've got it here. GG's at LA Valiant players. You guys are insane. Packing 10, stay free. You probably should stick to Valorant. Your team does better when you don't attend scrims half the time. Funny, your best year is about as good as my worst year, and we're still going to dominate playoffs.
Probably the most salty tweet we've seen. Like, we've seen some, shade tossed, but this one had that like salty, almost passive aggressive, right? Like there's been exchanges behind the scenes.
Aggressive. I would say aggressive. Yeah.
Okay, fair enough. I always say that too, by the way. I hate the term passive aggressive. I try not to use it. I'm like, no, I'm aggressive. I'm not passive aggressive.
I think that passive aggression exists. I just hate the actual passive aggression where it's just like, oh yeah, you guys did really great. Yeah, no, it was no. I mean, I think it was a really well fought. Like well, we don't need to get into the semantics of it.
But the reason why I bring this up, though, is because I feel Dpay is maybe the star coach that has his team do different things. I mean, like, I brought him up already a couple times. Like, well, they tried Zarya Ball and they kind of got rolled and had to swap. And he's gone at length to describe that he's trying to teach his team alternate win conditions, and sometimes then his players look a little lost, and maybe they would, do better under a Coach Krusty type system where it's like we drill everything perfectly. Whereas I've spoken to Deep, I've interviewed him before. He likes a fluid game, and maybe that's more like where my head's at as a content creator. But that also would probably make me a bad coach, because you just need to be disciplined to the meta, not creative. Like, being creative doesn't win you any awards. And it seems like DP has a little chip on his shoulder, right? Where the Valiant have sort of grinded their way up, and the Gladiators might feel a little snubbed for their accomplishments, and maybe even more importantly for the risks they take. Like, I don't feel like people really bring that up, that they're trying different things, and it kind of doesn't work most of the time, I would say, to be honest. And no one really knows as a viewer who the innovators of the scene really are. We get these stories coming out of like, oh, some team tried Torb and it destroyed, so we all copied it, right? Like, we don't get to see that unfold, which is why I was always a big fan of patch tournaments. Like, new patch, here's a tournament. Teams try to hide strats, whereas in the scrims, it's like it feels like a lot of that's worked out ahead of time. Yeah. And maybe with this new patch adding some chaos, we might get a little bit of that, where a team finds an edge that they know about but isn't widespread known, and maybe that benefits them. And I know from speaking with Deepe, he loves that kind of gameplay, whereas Overwatch typically doesn't really reward it that much. A little bit with hero pools, but not in the tournaments anyway, it feels like.
And he's definitely one to, even on a more of a micro scale, with the Great Debate, right? That was
right.
Was that team, and that's as simple as like, what if we just all walk in one square all the way around the point, and like make them forget that it's a 6v6 game, make it hard to count to 6 when we're moving, and they just don't realize we left somebody in the spawn room. Like, that's a much more micro version of that, but. And we saw it, I don't remember the specific play, but in Houston's last game, they kind of had like a Hail Mary strategy or something they were doing. And I don't remember the specifics of it. It didn't work. So like nobody talks about it. But at the same time watching it, I'm like, this is brilliant. This is great. This is one of those things where if this worked and all of a sudden there's a surprise map win against this opponent for this team, right? Like, it's just it's a really creative, really fun, interesting moment. And I think it's a great call out to specifically look to a team like the Gladiators to maybe have that wrinkle, or maybe do something just that little bit different, thinking in the way that the Dallas Fuel with Mickey on Brig in season 1 brought him in when that was a brand new character, and had success with it beyond what a lot of other teams and a lot of other players had on the role. I think that's a very great and specific call out to make. All right, I guess we'll go real quick. As far as the supports go, Mercy has got to be picked if there's like Ashe and if there's the Widowmaker, but it sounds like we're leaning a little more the double bubble dive, bubblegum Overwatch, I'm going to call it, if that's okay. I've got to borrow that term. But how do the healers fit into the kind of meta you're envisioning? We talked a lot about Brig already, and there's so much unknown there. So I guess, is there a world where Brig's good? What's paired with her? And if she's bad, what replaces her?
Yeah, if she's bad, Mercy would replace her, I think, as the go-to pick there. When you talk about supports, a lot of things come to mind. It's another reason why I think the Hog Zarya comp just wouldn't work, because like then you can go like Zen without fear of getting dove, and just pro Zens have way too much firepower, and the focus fire would be immense. So you got to play something that's more flexible. Sorry?
I was just gonna say, like, Zen Anna feels really good against that Roadhog meta at the pro level.
Yeah. That's why there's a lot. Again, we're with the guesswork. We're trying to figure out the seven degrees of Kevin Bacon, or hog bacon or something. Change the phraseology here. So yeah, I think Ana is absolutely crucial for the Winston comp to work, because of how just everything, like the breakpoints of everything, and how Nano Boost is so required to get that ultimate cycle working. He just does more damage and is harder to kill, so he farms up primal, and that's like so required for the the play style to work. So I think Ana's like non-negotiable basically. And then I'm not sure about Brig. Honestly, I'm just not exactly sure. Like I don't know if to me it feels like the 200 health points is too low actually. To the point where like a lot of things kill her easily, and at least against it depends what you're talking about up against as well. Like in the Winston Diva mirror, she always can land an ability and be safe. So maybe then she can still be played. Up against Hog though, it just feels like you'd rather just have Ana do that job because she can land her abilities from range safely, whereas Brig has to be a bit too close to be comfortable up against it. Whereas Winston and Diva coming in, they don't insta-kill Brig, even if she has less health now, right? So that means she can play around the positioning game and manipulate them a bit and get away and be able to heal. So that's how I see that working out anyway.
All right. Well, I don't know if I have more or less questions than when we started talking, I guess. Is what I want.
Well, I think for time, we'll probably go with less.
I do feel like I have a much better understanding of the challenges and the chess match and what some of the different options are here. And it's really important, I think, to realize that when you go into these things, that there's always, probably 2 or 3 ways it can go. And I think we laid out a few of them. Either the damage numbers are oppressive and we get the Gigahog comp version of the game that we've got, or we get the double bubble, which to me sounds like it might be really good if there's a mix. If we've got some people playing heavier Hog and other people playing more traditional dive, maybe that's a good starting point. And maybe we drop the Zarya entirely if it just becomes dive versus dive versus dive and it's all anybody's doing. So I think there's a lot here, and there's a lot obviously for the teams to digest and weigh and balance into their decision makings in the coming weeks. And that is, man, when this all started, when like 2 years ago, I was hating the idea of patches before playoffs and stuff like that. But now, especially I think in the hero pool world that we've been in Overwatch League, where it's kind of just been move in a little bit, even if not like crazy, it feels much more natural to get a new patch and a new change at the moment. So I'm really, really pumped for watching this all kind of unfold as the week goes on. And we even have the added benefit of not having to play comp in this patch and in this meta game. We can go play what hopefully turns out to be a much more balanced and traditional style of Overwatch and comp too. So yeah, all right. Yeah, but like you said, for the interest of time, we should probably talk about the matches that we know are going to be happening this coming weekend.
Yes.
Not a lot of them, but we'll kind of lay out what the structure of the weekend is going to look like.
It's not even weekend. It's starting on, what is it, Thursday? Or Wednesday?
Thursday.
Yeah, Thursday.
Actually, it might be Wednesday night. I don't know the timing on the Asia bracket. I just watch them when they're spots.
Thursday.
Morning, Thursday. Okay.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, I got the schedule pulled up here.
Cool.
Yes. Yeah, so on... Oh, yeah, you have it labeled. God, I'm stupid. So we have the play-ins starting on Thursday. We've got Houston versus Boston, and we've got Vancouver versus Washington. Let's start with your boys in green. Houston versus Boston. You were talking about this before. This is like your dream match, right? Like you get to see your favorite team play against your least favorite team.
And in even more perfect fashion, I mean, every metagame we just outlined, what is one constant theme?
That Boston sucks.
I'll skip to the last page. There's no Reinhardt involved here. And I really think Fusions is a completely different player on that hero versus the rest of the dive heroes. And while I have to admit, it gives them a run for their money as far as who the worst Winston is, hydration versus Fusions. That is a very interesting and valid conversation to have between the two of them. There's just a depth to Houston, and there's an ability to at least play passively. Like, listen, there's no doubt this has been a disappointing season for Houston. Just look at the win totals to find out. But when you really sit down and watch them play, by the end of the season, I got a little bit what I was talking about from the preseason, Blevins, where they really did look like a much better team. Now, the guys on Plat Chat love to say it. I don't have a better way to say it. They're just the most anti-clutch team in the league, and it's not particularly close. If there's a team that can find a way to lose a match this season, it's going to be especially one they should win, it's going to be the Houston Outlaws. So
even historically though, in the previous years too, not just this season, right?
No, it was.
Am I remember that correctly?
I mean,
lots of Map 5 losses, I remember.
There was a lot of talk about Map 5 losses in the past, but my counter to that was like, yeah, they've lost a lot of Map 5s and a lot more than they've won. But I could have said that about Maps 1, 2, 3, and 4 as well. So I didn't really start to get sold on the fact that it was like a Map 5 or a clutch problem until this year, when really they did kind of level up their gameplay on a consistent basis to being able to get into that situation for the one Dragon Blade to crush their dreams against the Valiant in that game. Or, now they're like reliably getting to those situations instead of whenever they popped up, they lost, but like they were losing way more often than winning at every other map and every other match. So I wasn't.
Right. There's between being not very good and being good enough but choking. That's what you're trying to say? Basically?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think now, and listen, maybe it was a choking problem before, and it was just kind of, at least in my mind, masked by the fact that they just weren't that good overall. But now we are starting to see at least a base level of competence, and really just quality, like team-oriented gameplay come out of this team. It just falls apart and hasn't led to match wins. Thankfully, they do play against the Boston Uprising, and I'm pretty confident that they're just the better team here. We did see, Boston's won twice all year, and one of them was the Toilet Bowl 7 map, first of 4 garbage against Houston in like week 3, right? The difference,
hilariously bad.
Hilarious, super entertaining. Like, even as a fan of the team that lost, I was like on the edge of it. Was phenomenal for spectator experience, if not the most shining example of pristine Overwatch gameplay that you've ever had. But I guess at the end of the day, there's a depth to Houston. There's a level of ability to play within this style that transcends like your weakest players, your main tank, which is really important on the Winston, et cetera, et cetera. I've got Houston winning this one. I've got it 3. What is it? I don't even know what it's going to be, best of or first 2 or whatever in these plans.
Yeah, we don't need to call specific matches.
Yeah, I give like 1 map to Boston here, but like they've not shown the ability to play any of those dive DPS style of heroes. They really need to be like Jerry on Ashe or Widowmaker or something to really, really be succeeding. And even in this matchup, Linkser counters Jerry's ability on any of those heroes. I take Linkser in that fight, heads up. He's a little inconsistent. Maybe he has a bad day that day, but you're talking about like the meta needs to be locked in on Winston in order for that main tank battle to be a draw. And Linkser's got to be having a terrible day for them to lose the DPS battle. Color Hex versus Dante, it's not close. Dante is just the better player. There's a depth of talent that doesn't exist on Boston. And maybe it's just Myungbong's day. Maybe Jerry does pop off. I'm not saying it's out of the realm of possibility, but I do think Houston have to be the favorites here by a sizable margin. Freedo, who do you got in this one? Also, we'll just kick you off the call if you give me the wrong answer.
I know I should answer this question, but it cropped up in my mind that this podcast, I think, has like some bad luck curse, because both of your teams are famous for choking, and there's always this debate about choking or sandbagging or bad or whatever with both your teams. There's a running theme there, and I think you guys are to blame basically, because
I agree, honestly.
How did you think that was the answer I wanted, Freedo?
Bringing up history and curses was not what we wanted to hear.
It might have been highly relevant, but shut up.
Yeah, I don't need to go into depth, I don't think. I would take Houston here. The only way I would see it not going that way is if like some meta shakeup just proves that Boston has like a pop-off player that Houston can't deal with, or like they drop a map or something figuring out the meta, or surprise comp or something. Like we've seen that happen where upsets, it looks like, I think particularly with Fusion losing recently, where it was like there's some games where they thought they had a read on the meta. They didn't, and they just get rolled. Or it was against the Gladiators, actually. A really great series in the regular season where they ran one comp. It didn't work at all. And then they were like, just bring Funny Astro in, run Lucio. It's not very good, but we know how to run that style. And then they reverse swept, right? Like Overwatch is like that, where the better team doesn't always win if you're playing the wrong way. And Houston definitely has the capacity to throw in that way if they're like hard-headedly doing the wrong thing. And it's almost better to like not over prep for this kind of match, basically, right? Because I don't want to hear any of this like, but we scrimmed this all week. No. Like everyone can see what is and isn't working.
Yeah.
So if Houston doesn't seal the deal on this, I'm gonna be upset.
Yeah.
You're upset.
I will say, and this can just go out to every Overwatch League team, player, staff, coach, etc. Not a single fan has ever once or ever will care about what you did or didn't scrim. Like, just win, forehead. Like, that is never an acceptable excuse to the fans. You can say it all you want. We don't care, ever. Just win,
that's
forehead.
never more true than when you have a round one opponent in the Boston Uprising who's won twice on the season. You have to win that game if you're a competitive Overwatch team.
Yeah. I mean, I'm definitely picking Houston here. As much as I want the troll victory, what I want more is for Houston's hopes to be raised so that it's even more crushing when they blow it.
We don't have any hopes. We don't have hope left.
That's true. Moving on, the other game on Thursday is Vancouver Titans versus Washington Justice. Death, what's your take on this one?
This one is admittedly really, really difficult. And that's to me because there is this X factor around Vancouver, and we've just seen such a limited amount of them as far as like the range of meta games we've seen them perform in, right? And we have had hero pools which have helped, but they've really never shined, and it's really hard to imagine them going into this dive play style, which is chaotic, but there's so much order inside that chaos, right? There's so much planning and execution that the top level dive teams have at their disposal. Man, I do hate Washington too. Like they're ever since
is Decay playing? Decay got signed by Washington, right?
He is. I did like
Shame.
I did a long rant about what a scumbag move that signing was in our last episode. But he did play, and he didn't lead to a win. Go figure. Like if you put Decay on a bad team like Washington or Dallas, they're still a bad team. They're just exciting. So I don't know. It's very interesting. I am leaning Washington slightly here. But again, there's that X factor. I can't. Like Shockwave was so impressive at times this season, and a lot of those times it was on heroes that I think have a real chance to be high impact in this metagame. Specifically the snipers, but like now you're talking about can he beat Decay and that 1v? It's really hard to imagine. I'm gonna lean Washington here. I think it's pretty close. Even if the score doesn't reflect that after the fact, I think, thinking about it ahead of time, you've got to at least recognize that there's a real opportunity for either team to make it out of this match and into Friday. So I'll take Washington. I just think the whole season, I think they have more people, like they don't have ping issues. Like it's just so hard to pick a team like Vancouver with everything that's been stacked up against them all year long. And even though they've been able to get a couple of wins against teams that are in this same range as Washington, man, there's so many questions. Coaching staff, like how do they react to this massive change and all those things. I'll go Washington. Super, super close though. Freedo, who you got?
I was thinking up my answer this whole time, and then you mentioned coaching staff, and I'm like, damn, that's a good point. Because I was gonna go with the Titans, and I think I still will, but they are definitely a team that could be prone to having the wrong read up the meta and not being prepared enough, or the meta just not even be figured out in time, right? Like it's one thing if everyone else figures out the meta and then you can just copy it. And then your coaches can be like, because learning from great players isn't that hard. Like I've made a career of doing it. They figure it out. I'm just like, that they jump there and they focus that thing. Oh, that seems to work really well. It's not that difficult to learn from other people.
If I watch it 15 times, I can start to understand what they were doing. Go figure, right? But
Right. but the Titans coaching, it's tough to give them a bad grade because they did just get a brand new team, right? But that looked to be quite a weakness for them in these games that they've had. I haven't had many, and they definitely have improved. Their individual players I would actually take above Washington. Shockwave is a great one. His stats are pretty remarkable. I usually ignore stats, but when they are that much of an outlier, it's like, hold on, there's something going on here. The one player that sticks out in my mind is Shredlock, who is their main tank. That I like his play style because he seems to commit to the play. Like there's as opposed to Roar, they're like night and day tanks to me. Roar is lucky that Hydration's on tank, so someone else can be the worst Winston in the league. But like, Roar is disgusting with his play sometimes, where I'm just completely shocked where they can get in situations where they should win, and it's a spot where your tank and support fundamentals should just carry the fight, but yet they find ways to lose fights. Washington this season especially, and I think Roar and just either the calling structure or Roar himself, I don't know who to blame specifically, but Washington finds ways to lose fights in that way. Whereas Vancouver might make mistakes, but they're looking to win the fight, right? Like they might over aggress a lot of times, but they're committing together and they're trying to make things happen, which I think is a template to improve. Now they might get screwed by not understanding the meta or not being coached or prepared or ready enough. This is the biggest game they've ever had, right? Like they came in with no expectations, but now you're in playoffs all of a sudden. You just got signed. The players across from them have a lot of experience. I tend to not weigh that too much, especially for online. On land, maybe a little bit more. Anyway, that's my long list of concerns. I will go with the Titans for the main tank difference, MTD, but I could see it going either way, and Decay might just do Decay things, and you get headshot too many times and just get boomed and you give up mentally, right? Like that, we've seen that happen to teams playing against Decay, so I wouldn't be surprised for that to occur.
Yeah.
We need a coin. You're the best we've got. Flip yourself.
All right. No, not gonna happen.
Backflip. I'd love to see it.
What if I just backflipped out of this chair? How sick would that be?
We would get so many YouTube subs, not only from bringing on a YouTube celebrity, but also from having video of you doing a backflip would be invaluable.
No, I think it would be more from being on the front page of live stream fails immediately. That's where the subs would go.
All publicity is good publicity.
You say that, but yeah, I mean, I gotta go with Washington here. It's so tough to consistently pick the Titans. I mean, all the points that you guys brought up are really good here. The one that it doesn't have to do with this match specifically necessarily. It also applies to Houston and Boston. Is that it's not out of the realm of possibility. So Freedo, you brought up like, okay, the meta might not be figured out yet, right? If you see other people doing it, you can copy it. These teams might have figured something out, right? Or like if one of the other like it really depends on what team has figured what out, right?
They've had a few weeks. That's a good point. They knew this was going to be the patch for a while. This isn't like
right. This isn't like
last week.
Exactly. It's not brand new, but like this is the time where teams are obviously keeping things as close to the chest as possible, right? So there's a non-zero chance that any one of these teams could have come up with it, but it's just statistically these teams that are playing first are worse off, right? Because like if Atlanta Reign, for instance, has some crazy strat, like these teams don't have the chance to see that or adapt to that or what have you. If Boston has a crazy strat, that's great for them, and if it's good, but then also Dallas and Atlanta and everyone else has a chance to adapt to that. So just something to bring up, that maybe there's some crazy looming strat or something like, we talked about that Houston and Shanghai sort of embraced last season of like, hey, maybe there's a meta breaker comp out there, and maybe the comp of the playoffs will be defined in it. Maybe it's this round, maybe it's in a later round. But long story short, I'm going with Washington here. Again, it's just too hard for me to pick the Titans consistently. So,
All right. Well, it's all on you, Flubby. That's the head coach of Vancouver. To get
Did you
it
give
right.
the coin a new name? And also, why are we flipping it with 3 people? Yep, the coin's named Flubby now for some reason.
We'll see if they I don't know. We'll see if they get the meta right. Maybe we'll honor him. If Vancouver wins the Overwatch League this season,
Yeah, we'll name the coin Flubby. Sure. Yeah,
Yep.
I'm willing to do that. The coin name is on the line for Vancouver
I'm willing
specifically.
I'm willing to do nothing as well. Okay, so moving on, we don't actually have the opponents for any other matches. So I'm just going to kind of give you guys a rundown of what the weekend's going to look like. And then maybe if we've got any, we can talk about teams that we think might have a good chance to stand out in the kind of meta games that we've been talking about this episode. So after Thursday, the Gladiators are going to pick between the winners of the day. So the winners of Houston versus Boston and Vancouver versus Washington, and also the Toronto Defiant are in the pool of teams that can be picked as the opponent here. They were placed well enough to not need to participate.
I was wondering where they were.
But they did not get to pick their opponent in round 2. So yeah, the Gladiators will pick, and then I didn't actually check on the order here, but either whoever's next up, Atlanta or Dallas, will get to pick, and then I believe it's Dallas that's the lowest ranked of the 3. They would get whoever's left. Okay, so They will then play out those 3 matches on Friday, and that brings us to the end of Friday. On Saturday, the play-ins are done, and we're officially into the double elimination bracket. Okay, there will be picks here again at the end of Friday, and that will be Philadelphia choosing between the qualified teams there, and then there's one more. I'm blanking on who it was.
Valiant?
Oh, the LA Valiant. Yes, the LA Valiant.
Oh, wow,
are another.
I picked that up just by looking at the teams. Man, it's almost like we've been covering the Overwatch League since its inception.
It's almost like that's true. So yeah, the Philly Fusion will pick between any of the 3 qualifying teams from play-ins or the LA Valiant, and then after that, San Francisco picks next, then Paris picks, then Florida gets whoever's left over to make up the end of the semifinals. Also, I'm sorry, that's the end of Saturday. We get those 4
that's the end
matches
of the quarters.
We start the semifinals on Sunday. Okay, so everything from here on out is bracket based. There's no more picking. There's no more any of that. Okay, so the winner of the Fusion versus whoever they select, and the winner of the Florida Mayhem and whoever they get stuck with, goes on to face off on Sunday in the semifinals. Also on Sunday is the winner of San Francisco versus their picked opponent, and the winner of the Paris Eternal versus their picked opponent. That is also on Sunday. The last 2 matches of Sunday, I actually don't know the order of them. I could have it wrong. Who knows? We go dip down into the losers bracket. We get some playoff elimination games. The loser from the first quarterfinal, so the loser of, what is that, Philly and their picked opponent, face off against the loser of San Francisco and their picked opponent, and then the other 2, the loser of Florida versus and Paris versus, face off as well in the losers bracket. And that wraps up our weekend. So after that, we'll have whoever's eliminated from the play-ins, right? Only 3 teams emerge from there, and then we'll have 2 more that make it into the double bracket but don't escape the weekend. So a ton of Overwatch going on over the course of those 4 days. Entire playoff arcs will be determined, right? Like there's going to be a team that is on a high of making it through play-ins, a low seed, here's our chance, the Cinderella story, only to just be summarily get their teeth kicked in and knocked out. Like it's going to be a ride for some fan bases this weekend, and I am certainly here for it.
Well,
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, we also have Asia as well.
Oh, yes, we do. That is just an entirely different bracket, and that is...
We know Chengdu versus London, and that's it.
Chengdu versus London, and then going into the next round, which is New York, will get to pick either whoever wins that one or the Seoul Dynasty, and then the other match will be
Hangzhou.
Whoever's not picked there versus Hangzhou. And then we go into double elimination bracket after that. I want to say the I don't know exactly in the Asia bracket what is and isn't played this weekend. We're using the actual bracket on the website, which is a little goofy. And the playoffs round 3 just show like, what is that, September 6th through 13th or 5th through 13th, something like that.
So basically, your interpretation of the website, and you can go to the Overwatch League website, is as good as what we're going to describe. So go ahead and do that.
But obviously, there you have the Shanghai Dragons and the Guangzhou Charge being unlocked, and they will, I believe, get to pick their opponents there. So they'll be Shanghai will pick between the winner of New York and their opponent, or the winner of Hangzhou and their opponent. And then it's double elimination bracket. It's a much smaller bracket with only 7 teams.
But it's
over
the
there
same
on
exact. It's basically the same exact format. It's just a smaller bracket.
Yeah, it's just about half the size. So nothing super crazy over there. And I guess, let's look at the first round, though. We do have Chengdu versus London. I gotta think, personally, I'm going to just kind of fast forward right to the last page here. I've got to think Chengdu in Dive has to be pretty well suited against a team that's really struggled to find too much identity in the London Spitfire. And we're talking about, if it is very dive oriented, if we're getting away from the Widowmakers, the McCrees, the Ashes, that kind of hit scan, and we're going more into the Tracers and the Sombras, it's Glister gets taken away from London. It's one of their best players. I'm going Chengdu. It's super close. But there's a chance this meta, if I'm right about ball, et cetera, like there's a chance Chengdu gets hot here. They've shown it at times during this season. There's no consistency there, but that's enough for me to pick them over London, who's been pretty consistent in a negative way throughout the course of the season. So I'll take Chengdu in that one. Freedo, who you got there?
Copy your homework on that one. I don't have much more to say. Both these teams are kind of underwhelming for different reasons for me. So I would say, though, if I recall correctly, London Spitfire has Pavane as their coach, who was the New York Excelsior coach before that. So at times, London look like they have their act together to me as a team, and they seem to punch above their weight. Which is like contrast to the entire Chengdu philosophy, which they're exactly the opposite team. Whereas London is like, they look like a pretty well coached team sometimes, and they can get their act together. Chengdu looks like they don't have coaches, and they're they can pop off on any given week, basically. Obviously that's not true. There's more method to their madness than that, but that's how it looks to me in terms of what play styles they prefer anyway. And so yeah, I'll say Chengdu as well, though. All of the previous discussion about like having the right read on the meta and all that applies here, I would say, for sure, for both these teams, because Chengdu might be like, well, we're just gonna run the thing we want. So the funny thing about Chengdu is sometimes the meta is the thing they like off meta, right? No matter what it is, almost, it seems like, even if the meta is the thing they normally play, they like it less. It seems because they want to counter the meta, which I don't think is the proper way to coach Overwatch.
It's a very card game-esque style of play.
Yeah, and it's inherently unreliable.
Yeah.
So I wanted to pick London, but I think the skill level of these players might just trump that.
There's also one thing I want to mention, because there's one guy in our Discord that is screaming Chengdu from the top of his lungs, and
you can admit that it's you, Death. It's okay.
It's not. There's one guy, and he really, really believes, and there is an X factor here, and it's one of the patch notes that we didn't discuss at the top of the episode. There was some significant Pharah changes. Jinmu will just lock Pharah and play it no matter what. And if there's any chance that hero is really impactful or really, really important in some way, or even just capable of catching people off guard in a meta where they're not prepared to run the hit scans, it really, really could be a thing for Chengdu here. But Blevins, who do you got in this matchup?
I got to go with Chengdu again. I'll copy the homework, but Chengdu has, and you alluded to it, both of you alluded to it, they have that sort of wow factor possibility, right? We can't say that about every team in the Overwatch League right now. Now, granted, obviously any team can beat any team theoretically, but that sort of like, we've called it sports magic, where like, yeah, the team can pop off and you don't need to be consistent, right? You don't need to be the best team in the Overwatch League overall. You need to be the best team right now. You need to catch lightning in a bottle. That will pay off here, unlike in the long slog of the season. You can catch lightning in a bottle. You can do something that's off meta, and maybe long term it doesn't work, but maybe you counter the meta for that weekend, right? That's huge. Getting individual wins is absolutely huge in the playoffs, and Chengdu, more so than many other teams, feels like they have that capacity to do that. So I'm going to believe there's a reason they're called Chengdu and not Chengdon't, and it has nothing to do with where they're from. It is you gotta believe. Give me Chengdu here.
How are we going to talk about I think you're muted, by the way, Deathblow. How are we going to talk about these other matches? Do we want to like pick out some teams that, who we think is going to come out on top? Because we can't guess all the matches, right? But
yeah, there's no way to do that. And if we didn't have such a big meta conversation, Blevins and I probably would have tried. But let's do exactly that. Let's just, are there any teams on the NA side that aren't in those first play-in rounds that we discussed? Teams you think, Freedo, have a real chance to pop off, and what is it about them that you think will fit into this meta?
No. Next question. But that is a good question. I did set you up.
Cisco wins it all.
Well, here's the reason why, though, and I think this happens. I would say that both in APAC and NA, there is such distinct tier differences to me in both regions where we have to remember this format is a very inclusive one where, everyone's got a shot to maybe make a run. But in a normal playoff, like a big chunk of these teams wouldn't even be invited, basically, you know what I mean? Just based on the format. So I think there's a lot of teams here that are gifted a chance to make a run, but I don't actually see any Cinderella. There's not like a team I can look to and be like, in any meta, do I think will they like trump some of the top teams? I would say I am a bit worried for the Florida Mayhem and the Paris Eternal, who seem to like ebb and flow with the meta a bit more than Philly and Shock do. Like they're teams that have upset at the right times, but if it doesn't land for them, they might not go as far. But anyone below them, I'm just like writing them off, basically. I would be really surprised if they make significant runs, even past the next round, basically.
Well, that was just a beautiful segue for the two teams I want to talk about here, Freedo. So big thank you for that. I've got an arrow up and an arrow down. I've got one team that I think has a chance to be even better than normal within this playoff meta as we've kind of laid it out. And the one I think has got a chance to improve is the Florida Mayhem. I think we talked about, the one DPS composition that came to mind was Tracer and Sombra together. And that to me is a perfect fit for what Yaki and BQB are able to do. This is a team that I think does rise and fall a bit, as you said. And I think a lot of it has to do with the DPS heroes that are active in any given meta at the time. They're in a weird spot. Their best Tracer player is their best Genji player, and that's made things like a little clunky at times. But Sombra is BQB territory. Tracer is Yaki territory. I think if that's what the meta is, they're going to know what they want to do. They're going to hit the ground running, and they're going to have success with it. I also think Fate has been a very, very good, like top 3 Winston player in Overwatch League in seasons past when Winston was good. Been a minute since that's really been the case, but we did see that resurgence of the the double bubble bubblegum Overwatch composition that we've had kind of late in the year. He's fit in really well there, and really I think as long as it's not suddenly a Lucio meta on the support side, I think they just lose a lot of their weaknesses, a lot of the things that can really go wrong for them. They just seem to fit into what we're kind of outlining the meta to be, assuming we're right. The team that I've got a big old arrow down on, what was the other team you mentioned, Freedo? Oh, that's right. It was the Paris Eternal. I absolutely agree. They're a little bit volatile, and I think it centers around their tank line. There's no doubt about the resurgent year that Ben Best has had this season. He's really upped his game. He was always kind of this Reinhardt kind of, not really one trick, but just like Reinhardt specialist, right? It was similar to Fusions, but like plus 10% across the board, and that like you just get the best out of him when he gets to play that hero. And I made a Gigabrain 5-head call early in the season about how Houston was going to beat the Paris Eternal when they were forced into a Houston metagame for like the first ever hero pool or whatever it was. And I really think that's going to continue on. Now, Ben Best is much improved on the Winston from that time, but they're still, even late in the year, we're a little indecisive. Are we bringing in No Smite when it's Winston time, or what are we doing? And I think that when you talk about, listen, it might not matter in the first round, first 2 rounds, right? Like they might make it to the winners finals, but this is a team that should probably be talked about as a potential league winner, but we're going into a hero pool that, like, if it's Tracer and Sombra together, is Sparkle on the stage? Like, is he playing? I don't know. I legitimately don't know if they get him in there. The way they've been playing, it might be Eggsy and Soon. I'm much less scared of Eggsy Soon than I am Eggsy Sparkle. I don't care about the heroes personally, but that's what the team wants to do. So I think they're really, really well coached, and I think they've done remarkable things this year, but I feel like this meta might be getting away from them. It's just kind of a gut feeling. They're still, like you said, they're not one of the teams you write off because they're just too talented. They're in that top 4 of the standings where you really think, okay, they're one of the runners, or one of the teams in contention. But I a little bit agree with Freedo. I don't see a Cinderella story happening here, right? Unless somebody has that offbeat, weird, inside track on what the best thing in the meta is. If somebody develops something that's just busted and has a head start on it, that's the way we get that kind of a story. But at least on the NA side of things, those are the 2 that I'm really thinking are impacted the most. I also hate to say it because they're just going to choke anyways, but New York would probably be pretty well suited on the Apex side to transition into something very dive based. I think if somehow the meta gets to the point where obviously they get Zenyatta and their support line, I think that could tremendously help New York as well. So maybe that ties into how good / bad is Brig and in her new form and what these teams are trying to do. Maybe that's a high impact meta option as well that New York's able to level up there. But since I stole your team right in the last second there, Blevins, why don't we go to you? Anybody you think is arrow up or arrow down or really impacted by the meta?
No, you guys brought up a lot of good points, and especially for time, I don't want to dwell too much on it. The long and short of it is it's really hard for me to look at these matchups and see anyone really coming out of the woodwork and overperforming here. It's hard to do that. Like you brought up a really good point, Freedo, that like a lot of these teams just wouldn't even be here under normal circumstances. And like when there's that, like, when you're like the last quarter or maybe the last eighth of a season and you like need to really fight to make the playoffs, like you start to see like the storyline starts then where it's like they scrapped and they got that, wild card spot, or, they made it into the last seed of the playoffs, and you can see that start to bubble up and go. Here it was like, well, there's a bunch of like essentially like makeup games played in the last couple of weeks, and like it didn't matter at all. Like what did the like, yes, like
whole season doesn't matter. Actually, none of it mattered. If you think about it, there was no gatekeeping to get to the playoffs. So
how many buys do you get? Yeah.
It's just one buy.
Yeah, you're playing a lot for one buy. And as someone who in competitive Magic has done a lot for 1 to 3 buys, I understand that, but it is not the same as playing for your life in the rest of the season, right? And because of that, we didn't see the like, an Atlanta Reign really make a run and look like a contender and then have a really crazy, late performance against San Francisco that bumped them down to the loser bracket last year. Right. Exactly. We didn't see that just inherently. So it's really hard to predict that, and I'm not going to because of it. So long story short, I think our top 4 are our top 4 right now. And it'll be an exciting surprise to see someone come out of the woodwork, but I'm not predicting it. So
one cool thing we did see with these teams, though, it isn't like in previous seasons where there's a meta swap and who knows how teams handle that problem. We had that problem all year. So that's why we can speak with a little confidence and have some interesting things to think about and say, where I think, like on the Mayhem side, Chris was an asset on Birgitta. And if he can't play Birgitta, maybe we've undervalued
Yeah.
that, or with Paris, for example, Ben Best is a great example as well. But like a player that they like to sub in, Nico, at times really underperformed, and other times was the best Echo, and then Echo's out of the meta, and then so we know the personality of these teams and how resistant they are to these changes, relatively speaking, because they know themselves, right? Sometimes you can't really get a good feel because nobody knows, not even the team themselves, because they haven't played the player they need for that role, right? We got a chance to see how these players adapt and who the teams might even pick in those given circumstances. When I've made my calls thus far, I have been doing it from the standpoint that I'm not guessing what the meta is. Like DB was a bit more like, all right, let's put it under this meta assumption. I'm being a little bit more open to that because I'm less confident because, it's amazing what some of the top players can do. Maybe someone does pull out a hit scan for the last rodeo or whatever it's called, the last hurrah before hit scans get nerfed, right? So maybe the head clickers come and just carry, right? But so some of these teams are more needing a certain meta than others. And oddly enough, like San Francisco, just sort of cap this off, somehow just found the perfect signing in Ons. Because how long have I been saying that their Widowmaker play is weak, even with Striker? I've been saying it forever. People say, blah, blah, you don't know anything, Freedo. Striker's great. Meanwhile, he's like camping in the back of the map, holding a passive angle, not carrying whatsoever, just letting his whole team do everything for him.
Yeah.
And Ons just gives them who's it's unfair to make this kind of signing. It just is unfair because that was their one weakness, is their DPS play, and then they get maybe the hottest Widowmaker of the season. So luckily he does have some for the other teams hoping to have a chance against San Fran. He does seem to be less flexible in terms of his understanding of the role of DPS. Like if he's in a headshot gallery, he's proven to just dominate even some of the best teams, which is terrifying if he gets the chance. And oddly enough, let's say we get the Countdown Cup meta, San Fran's DPS was good enough, right? I wasn't blown away by their performance, but they won convincingly anyway. It just didn't matter because their teamwork. I muted myself. And adaptation is just that damn good.
My computer exploded. So
they're just that good. Like the Coach Krusty factor is what I'm riding to the bank with the NA bracket. I think Coach Krusty is he's on another level with what I've seen him do with players. And I think, we were speaking about this before the show started, but a player like Sinatra has taken that into Valorant and looks like a completely different human in that scene. I think the players on the Shock just transform under his watch due to because I think if you take them out and put them on different teams, they just look like another Owl Pro. But on the Shock, they just play the game in a higher standard that it's going to be tough for anybody to match. I sort of feel the same way on the other side of the bracket with Shanghai. I think they stand out pretty convincingly. I don't want to get my hopes up for New York fitting in the meta, and
I do, but
I don't think that's going to happen. I would say it's Shanghai's going to win on that side. Maybe not to direct the show too much, but what do you guys think? Are we going? This is probably for shows in the future, I guess. But are we going to a San Fran Shanghai finals in China for the 6 a.m. matches that you're going to have to watch?
I mean, personally, I think as much as we can talk about there's an anti-clutch or a choking problem in Houston, I think it's almost been more apparent for Shanghai. Like the Shang 9 is a very real problem for them. When the stakes get high, they have shown a propensity to want to fall apart and to make the crucial mistake that cost them something. So I think the Apex side of the bracket, I mean, if you're just on paper lining them up, then it's a two-man race. It's like Guangzhou is the only one that can really stack up to them and have a puncher's chance. But, with everything on the line, with the losing you're going home or, kind of mentality and everything that surrounds playoffs, I think that added pressure really levels the playing field for a team like Shanghai, who maybe on paper is a bit of a runaway.
So bet my life savings on Chengdu is what you're saying.
If that's what you heard.
I mean, I'll be your bookie on that. So just ship it to me, and then I'll place your bets for you.
But yeah, and I really liked what you said on the other side. I mean, it's hard to imagine a world where it's not either Philly or San Francisco, and there is, I think, a sizable advantage or leg up for Coach Krusty. We can't speak enough about how much we respect and admire what Krusty's been able to do with the San Francisco organization. And you're right. I mean, you see a similar even kind of play style in Sinatra when he goes to Valorant, and it's just the very smart, calculated aggression, like just
taking over the game, right?
Yeah, just
like blowing people away. Like their goal isn't to win, it's to destroy you, like as hard as they can.
Yeah, not every time, but they play for that every time. And it's absolutely something that comes from the coaching staff. And you talked about how unfair it was Ons gets to go to San Francisco, and I'm still like, it's so unfair they got Krusty from Boston, because we talk ad nauseum about putting players in the best possible opportunity to succeed and giving them, you know, what they need to succeed. And that's something Krusty does beautifully. And that's something, listen, like, would Ons be considered one of the top Widowmakers if you dropped him onto Washington in place of Decay? No, we probably wouldn't be talking about him at all. He'd probably be roughly in Jerry territory, right? Like, pops off, looks great, there's something here, people like him, the fans are into it, but like, doesn't change the team, right? But you put him into a team that's like wall-to-wall MVP candidates, as far as the eye can see. They couldn't even fit Smurf into the list. You know, it's just, hey, just go click the heads, man. We got you because you play Widowmaker. We needed a Widowmaker. Don't worry, even if you die, we still have the league's best like fight win rate when we suffer the first death in a team fight. Like, it's just so easy to succeed when you join a team that's so well coached and so well built of the San Francisco Shock, that you just, hey, all I got to do is my job. I don't even got to fit into this team, right? I just got to kill 2 people before I get taken out, and I'm good. This team does everything else you need it to do. And in that environment and in that scenario, you're not even going to die because you've killed 2 people, and the rest of your team's that good. So the peeling's there, whether you need it or not, and all those things. So yeah, it's a great point to bring up how he just completely closed the gap in what was, you know, kind of their biggest weakness, and really set them up. Really the only weakness I think they have now is Genji, and they dodged that bullet, right? Like, that 2-week metagame was right before the finals, and you know, I don't know that Tayo is the answer. I think Rascal was probably the correct choice. Certainly wasn't super. We like to make a joke out of that, even though he put out a tweet.
Shame on you, Krusty.
Not to make a joke out of that. Shame. But you know, that would have been an area where maybe they couldn't have played every play style, or maybe
that's the tournament they lost, right?
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah, Paris got that W there,
right?
With Sparkle in the Genji meta. So yeah, that was kind of the one hero where they still remain. They're still better than over half the teams in the league, but that is the one spot where maybe you're like, oh, they don't have mechanically a top 5, top 3, whatever player in that spot, and we're guaranteed not to be there, right? Like, Genji's kind of just awful at the moment.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know. It's a really good point. It does feel, although I gotta say, we've had this conversation before. Season 1, Freedo, I was roasted. I mean, like, taken to task in our Discord because I said, there's a very real chance New York doesn't win this thing. What do you mean? Of course they're going to win it. This isn't sports. This is a video game, and they've been dominant, and what could possibly happen? And
I mean, that was mostly
take Zen out of the meta. Just
sports is what happened, right?
Make Zen play Roadhog. That's what happened.
To an extent, yes. I mean, that was definitely a factor, but it's also just the sports magic of it, the pressure of it, the stakes, all of that. They force the error that doesn't otherwise exist, that a team wouldn't normally have, and that's a team like San Francisco that's done it. San Francisco had that error last year. We mention it because we're getting close to the playoffs. We mention it 3 times an episode. Moth face, right? Like, why isn't that a Twitch emote yet? Nobody knows, but it's not. But like, that can happen. Now, it's double elimination, so does it happen twice this time? Or was that loss by the 3-0, like Philly just 3-0'd San Francisco a couple weeks ago. Was that loss? And now San Francisco's just unbeatable. It happened too early. Now they're tripled down. Their efforts are doubled down. Everything. They're just ready to go. But yeah, it's hard to imagine it on paper being one of the somebody outside those two teams, but it's very, very likely. I mean, all those predictions, all those everything, they just go out the window when you start and somebody's having a bad day and somebody else is popping off, and it's the beauty of it. It's why these playoffs and everything have been so much fun. My big hope is just that we get the best two teams at the end, right? We've had two finals, and this happens a lot, every sport, everything, where the championship isn't your most hotly contested matchup, and it's not. But it comes up every now and then, and you get there, right? And we're due, and I think it's something that would really help just the overall league. And it's not fair to put that pressure on the teams, et cetera, but like, I don't care if it's Shanghai versus San Francisco, as long as they are the best two teams when we get there, and it's the best 1v1 matchup against the teams, right? Like, that's what I want. A final mapper. I want extra time. I want overtime. I want map. I want to go into the deciding King of the Hill match, and it goes to .3, and it's 99-99. Like, if we can get that, I don't care about the rest of it. I don't care what the names are. Nothing else matters to me. That's kind of what I'm rooting for. But yeah, it does absolutely have that feel of there's two teams that are just more complete and more just better positioned than the rest right now.
Yeah. I feel like we had the two best teams in the finals last year. It's just the finals weren't close at all. Like, San Francisco was just so much better than Vancouver last year.
But there was other teams that would have given us a better game in that final, right? Like, maybe they weren't the best team, but after the shake up, like, I would have rather have seen Atlanta, for example, try to repeat,
that would have been a cool story.
Those lines, and to get that redemption, even if it wasn't close, right? Like, I don't know, it's you're right. It might be a matter of like the best teams were there, but I want the best teams for the best match, not necessarily the best two. So I guess what I'm saying.
Yeah, no, I get that for sure. So yeah, I'm gonna lead us towards the ending of the show because we are pushing 2 hours here. So that is what happens when we got Freedo on, and we really just wanted more time to talk to him.
Point the finger. I get it.
I'm pointing the finger at me. I haven't even been recording. This has just been a call between us the whole time. There's no show. There hasn't been a show. Tomorrow's the real show. No, but Freedo, again, thank you for coming on, bud. Really do appreciate it. Now is the time to sell out, shout out, plug, whatever you got going on. The floor is yours.
I don't want to do any of that. The one thing I want to say before the show's over is I'm willing to bet that if Ans has to play Sombra again, that he looks like the best Sombra in the playoffs because of the Coach Krusty factor. He looked uncomfortable even when they were winning. And if Sombra's not meta, I think shocker set because if there is a mechanical carry DPS, they have it now. That the Echo and Genji are like to the side, so it'll probably be still Ashe or Widow, and they Ons will pop off on that too. But that's what I want to make. Also, I think Shanghai Dragons might be a little overrated, and so is APAC as a whole. I think the Shocker better.
Ooh,
I absolutely agree with that. I know I'd never, without having the comparison, it's always bothered me to talk about like that. When people were like Shanghai, they were holding Shanghai above San Francisco early in the year, and it just never added up to me, and it was never going to until they got the regions together. So really, really excited for that. But nice try, Freedo. We're going to plug your stuff for you. You can find Freedo on YouTube on the channels Your Overwatch and Click Heads. Click Heads is the Valorant one. Your Overwatch, if you couldn't do the math on that, is the Overwatch channel. What's your Twitter handle? Where can people find you on there?
At Your Overwatch YT. Hit me up.
He's usually yelling at me whenever I say something stupid or get overly excited about a balance update coming on. Really appreciate you coming on the show. It's always a pleasure. Can't wait until the pandemic, all that stuff clears up, and we get to meet up in another city.
We can run FriendCon.
They're known for.
We can actually do FriendCon at some point.
Nice.
It's a cockamamie idea I've had for a while.
Yeah, you keep saying it, but it's me that gets the DMs. Like, when is it? What weekend? And like, I've literally had people like
I'm
message
not
me like,
okay.
"Well,
Here's the thing. I'm not going to do it while we're still in. I'm not even going to think about it until it's later.
I'm not saying it was a good idea for them to be trying to book plane tickets, but they were.
Yeah, that's a yikes. Death. Where can people find you on the internet when you're not here on the show?
I try to stay off the internet as much as possible. No, it's Deathblow TTV on Twitter. The stream's been a little inconsistent. I got some IRL things going on lately that have made it kind of difficult to focus too much on that. But Deathblow TTV on Twitch as well. If you guys want to give me a follow there, I'll probably turn on and play some obscure weird game nobody wants to watch anybody play next week or so.
I wouldn't have it any other way. And you can find me on Twitter at @the_Blevins. You can find the show on Twitter at High Noon Podcast. You can find us basically everywhere, High Noon Podcast. All of that good stuff. Just go anywhere, type in High Noon Podcast, and that's probably us. But that is going to be it for the show. Thank you again to Freedo for coming on. But for Freedo, for Death Bowl, I'm Blevins. And remember, it's High Noon. Okay, Freedo, last second prediction. Who's winning it all?
I mean, the easy money's on Shock, isn't it?
I mean, yeah.
If you had to pick one team, it'd have to be Shock.
Boring.
Can't clickbait that title.